"Grandma, they're sending you to a nursing home today." Those were the words my 8-year-old granddaughter whispered into my ear, her little arms wrapped around my neck as if she already knew she was about to lose me. My own son, my only child, and his wife had decided I was too old, too inconvenient, too expensive to keep around. My name is Nora Whitaker. I'm 67 years old, and in that single moment, I realized the people I trusted most were planning to discard me like worn-out furniture. They thought I was powerless. They thought I had no choice. They had no idea what I was about to do. The afternoon had been peaceful, the kind of quiet that only comes in early autumn by the Massachusetts coast. I sat on the porch of my little wooden cottage, needle and thread moving slowly through a frayed quilt that had warmed me for decades. Beside me, Poppy crouched on the worn boards, carefully arranging seashells into the shape of a heart, her tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. The rhythm of waves against the cliffs below and the faint, briny scent of the ocean made everything feel steady, safe, until she leaned close and whispered words that sliced through me like a blade. "Mom says this afternoon they're taking you to a place with doctors all day and all night." For a moment, I froze, the quilt heavy in my lap. My chest tightened, breath caught. The innocence in her voice made it worse. She didn't even know she had just dropped a bomb into my world. My hand stilled, and I forced my lips into a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Did she really say that?" I asked softly. Poppy nodded, her curls bouncing, still fiddling with the shells as though nothing had changed. To her, it was just something she overheard, a secret to share with her grandmother. To me, it was a betrayal too sharp to hide. When Jason and Sloan arrived a little later to pick her up, I greeted them with practiced ease, as though my heart wasn't pounding, as though their decision hadn't just been exposed by their own daughter. I hugged Poppy longer than usual, inhaling the faint scent of her shampoo, committing it to memory. Once their car disappeared down the narrow street, I moved quickly. In my bedroom, I pulled an old photo album from the shelf, its leather cover cracked with age, tucked inside. Hidden beneath a picture of Cal and me on the day we bought this cottage was a small brass key I hadn't touched in years. I slid it into my pocket, along with my wallet and a few necessities. I buttoned my coat, stood at the doorway, and looked back only once at the quiet cottage that had been my home for decades. Then I stepped outside, the chill sea air cutting across my face. They thought I was weak. They thought I had no choice. But as I walked away from that little house with the key pressed tight in my palm, one thing was certain. My story wasn't ending in a nursing home. It was only beginning. The morning air in Boston was sharp, the kind that bit at your cheeks as you walked through the canyons of glass and stone. State Street rose before me like a wall of wealth and power, its buildings gleaming in the pale sunlight. I pushed open the heavy glass door of the trust bank, and the familiar chill of polished marble floors and echoing footsteps wrapped around me. The heels of a young woman clicked briskly across the lobby, her pace purposeful, her gaze fixed straight ahead. No one looked twice at me, just another older woman in a plain coat, until I handed over my key. The manager himself escorted me into the vault, his tone shifting instantly the moment he glanced at the account details. Respect, deference. It was a language Money had always spoken fluently. Together. We slid the brass keys into the metal box. My hands trembled slightly, not from weakness but from the weight of memory. Inside lay the life my late husband, Cal, had quietly built. His worn leather notebook, filled with sketches and calculations in his careful hand. Patent filings for marine equipment, ingenious yet simple mechanisms that had sold steadily for years. Folders of brokerage statements, blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, holdings I'd never flaunted. I lifted the ledger and scanned the figures. $17.2 million. Even after all this time, the number stunned me. I had lived modestly, clipping coupons, wearing sweaters until the elbows thinned, letting Jason believe we had little. He needed to stand on his own. Cal had insisted. He'll never know what he's capable of if he leans on us. But as I sat in that vault, marble cold beneath me, I realized my son had chosen not independence, but dependency of a crueler kind, on his wife's ambitions and schemes. I instructed the manager to prepare the paperwork for a new trust, separate and untouchable, and to draft power of attorney documents that no one could misuse. His eyebrows rose, but he nodded, efficient and discreet. Before leaving, I stopped at my safe deposit drawer. Among the bank statements was an envelope from the clerk's office. I slid it open casually, expecting some bureaucratic notice. My stomach dropped. A hearing tomorrow morning, ex parte. My name listed as the proposed ward. My son and daughter-in-law had filed to have me placed under guardianship, claiming I was no longer capable of managing my affairs. I folded the paper slowly, slipped it back into the envelope, and closed the box with deliberate calm. On the surface, I looked like any grandmother tending to errands in the city. But inside, the betrayal burned hot. They thought I wouldn't find out. They thought they could silence me before I even had a chance to speak. They had underestimated me. Rain slicked the streets outside North Station, the late afternoon light gray and heavy. I ducked into a narrow cafe, the kind of place where the counter smelled of burnt espresso and wet coats. At a corner table, 2 people waited. Marin Levy rose to greet me, a small woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing, a leather-bound notebook already in her hand. Beside her sat Reed, a lawyer with calm, deliberate movements, his tie slightly askew as if he'd been in court all morning. Marin wasted no time. "Your daughter-in-law, Sloane," she began, sliding photographs and documents across the table. Credit card debt, over $140,000, multiple accounts, all near the limit. I studied the pages, my fingers tightening around the edge. "She's been hiding it from Jason," Marin continued. "He's been taking overtime shifts at the fish processing plant. 12-hour nights, 6 days a week. He's exhausted. But the money never covers the hole," Reed added quietly. "We've also uncovered Sloane's business interest, a small stake in a chain of budget nursing homes, facilities with repeated state violations. If she gains control of your property, she profits twice. She sells your home, and she funnels you into one of her own facilities." I felt my throat constrict. Betrayal upon betrayal. But Marin wasn't finished. She slid another paper across the table, her expression grim. "This is worse. A medical record filed with the guardianship petition. It claims you're showing signs of dementia. The prescribing doctor? Retired last year. The signature is forged." The room tilted for a moment. If I hadn't come today, if I hadn't seen the notice, by morning, a judge could have signed away my rights based on lies. Marin's voice softened, but the steel in her words remained. If you hadn't shown up, they would have won by default. Guardianship, total control over your finances, over your life. I sat back, the hum of the cafe fading to a dull roar in my ears. My son, my only child, may have been complicit, or maybe he was blind to the extent of Sloane's schemes. Either way, the outcome was the same. They were ready to strip me of everything under the guise of care. I looked from Marin to Reed. "Then we fight," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not just for me, for Poppy. If they can discard me, they'll do worse to her." For the first time in years, a strange calm settled over me. The pieces of their plan were in motion, but so were mine now. They thought I was powerless. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The next morning, the old courthouse in Essex smelled of varnish and damp wood, its benches worn smooth by decades of restless hands. I stepped into the cramped hearing room, my heart steady despite the way Jason's eyes widened when he saw me. Sloane's face froze into a smile too tight to be real. They hadn't expected me to show up. Reed rose beside me and requested permission for me to speak. The judge nodded, and I stood. My voice was clear, deliberate, each word chosen to slice through the lies. I explained how I paid my own bills, how I drove myself to appointments, how I cooked, cleaned, and lived alone without issue. I placed copies of my property tax receipts and bank statements on the table, evidence of independence. Then I set down the small recorder Marin had given me. "This is a conversation recorded last week," I said. The room went quiet as Sloane's voice played back, casual, unguarded. "We can book the cheaper bed this weekend. She won't know the difference." Jason shifted uncomfortably. Sloane's knuckles whitened as she gripped the arm of her chair. Finally, I handed the judge a copy of my financial records. No debt, no delinquent payments, nothing that suggested incompetence. The judge scanned the file and then frowned at the guardianship petition. He tapped one page with his pen. "This prescription," he said slowly, "was supposedly written 3 months ago." He glanced at me. Yet the physician listed retired last year. His gaze sharpened toward Jason and Sloane. "Can either of you explain this?" Silence. The truth spoke for itself. The judge leaned back, his tone firm. "The emergency petition is denied. A full evaluation will be scheduled, and Mrs. Whitaker's competence will be independently verified." Relief washed through me, though I kept my face composed. As we left the courtroom, I allowed myself one long breath. I had won the first round, but I knew all too well the fight was far from over. By late afternoon, I was back in Rockport. The wind had picked up, tugging at my coat as I walked past the elementary school where Poppy played at recess. Across the street, a weathered 2-story colonial stood with a fading "for sale" sign creaking in the breeze. I stopped, staring at its wide front porch and tall windows that overlooked the schoolyard. Without hesitation, I stepped inside with the realtor and wrote a check, paid in full. The house was mine before the ink dried. At a small desk near the front window, I called the bank and instructed them to establish a trust fund, $5 million for Poppy, locked away until she turned 25, a future she could claim free from her parents' grasp. That evening, Marin sent photos to my phone. Poppy, bundled only in a thin jacket, walking alone down the sidewalk at dawn. Jason still asleep after a night shift. Sloane nowhere in sight. My granddaughter raising herself while her parents unraveled. And then came Marin's voice on the line. "CPS already has an open file. Neighbors reported neglect weeks ago." I pressed the phone tight against my ear, fury rising like a tide. They could betray me, dismiss me, even try to strip me of my rights. But Poppy? No. I stood on the empty porch of my new house as the sun set, the schoolyard quiet now, leaves skittering across the pavement. From this spot, I could watch over her every day. My jaw tightened as I whispered to the night. My son may have turned his back on me, but I will never turn my back on my granddaughter. The vow settled deep in my chest, firm and unshakable. From here on, I would be the shield between her and the chaos closing in. Jason's house smelled of roasted salmon, butter and lemon drifting through the air as if to set the stage for something warm and welcoming. The dining table was perfectly set, the soft yellow glow from the chandelier casting a sheen over polished silverware. On the surface, it was a family dinner. Underneath, it was a performance, Jason had called it an attempt to mend fences. I accepted, but tucked a small recorder into the pocket of my coat before stepping through their door. I knew better than to take anything at face value now. Sloane greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She ladled food onto my plate, her voice smooth. "We just want you to be safe. Nora, to know there's medical care on hand if you need it. Someone always there for you." She placed her manicured hand over mine as if to sell the sincerity. I let her words hang in the air before sliding a sealed envelope across the table. "Then perhaps you'll find this interesting." Jason frowned, opening the flap. His eyes darted over the letter inside, written on official letterhead from the state's leading geriatric specialist. "Mrs. Nora Whitaker is fully competent, with no indication of cognitive decline." Sloane's face drained of color. She reached for her glass, stammering about the weather, about Poppy's school, anything to move the conversation elsewhere. But the mask had cracked. Jason, perhaps nervous or desperate, blurted what he never should have. If you just agree to the move, the credit card debt would be cleared this week. The room stilled. Forks froze above plates. My heart thudded, not with surprise, but with confirmation. That was the truth, spilled out in a single slip. I leaned forward, my tone sharp enough to cut through the silence. "So that's what my life is worth to you? A line item on a credit card statement?" Jason swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping. Sloane pressed her lips together. Her eyes narrowed. The warm glow of the chandelier seemed suddenly harsh, spotlighting their guilt. The salmon sat untouched on my plate. Appetite was the last thing I felt. That night, I returned to my cottage to gather a few more belongings. Outside, the ocean winds howled against the cliffs, rattling the shutters and setting the old wind chimes into a frantic clatter. It was as though the sea itself echoed the storm brewing inside me. My phone buzzed. Marin's message lit the screen, a photo of Poppy, bundled in only a thin coat, walking alone to school through the morning chill. A child left to fend for herself while her parents slept. Minutes later, Marin called. "CPS has officially opened the case. They'll be interviewing neighbors and teachers soon." I closed my eyes, grief colliding with rage. The betrayal against me was one thing. The neglect of my granddaughter was another. But the night still had more to reveal. As I sorted through papers at my desk, voices drifted faintly through the vent that carried sound from the alley. Sloane's, unmistakable, sharp, businesslike. "If we force her to sign, the debt disappears, and with her out of the way, my stake doubles in value." The response was muffled, but the meaning was clear. She wasn't just maneuvering for control of me. She was gambling my future for a payday. I froze, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. Jason's weakness was pitiful, but Sloane's cold calculation chilled me to the bone. This wasn't family. This was predation. I straightened, the fury inside me sharp and focused. The wind slammed against the window, but my voice was steady as I whispered into the storm. "You picked the wrong woman to manipulate. I am not your prey." The courthouse in Essex felt colder than usual that Monday morning, the draft seeping through narrow windows that rattled against the gusting wind outside. News bulletins had already warned of a nor'easter barreling toward New England, but inside the paneled courtroom, another storm was already gathering. I walked in flanked by Reed and Marin, my steps steady though my pulse hammered beneath my coat. Jason and Sloane sat on the opposite bench. Jason's hands twisted together, his shoulders slumped as if carrying invisible weight. Sloane, in contrast, wore her crisp blazer like armor, her chin lifted high, her expression tight. The judge adjusted his glasses and called the matter to order. Reed rose first, his voice calm, controlled. Your Honor, Mrs. Whitaker is not the frail dependent her family has painted her to be. She is fully capable, both financially and cognitively, and today, she will prove it. I stood, holding Cal's old leather notebook. My voice didn't waver as I read aloud the patent numbers, every single one that had kept his inventions alive long after his death. Automatic mooring cleats, hydraulic winches for small boats, compact desalination pumps. Each design had not only been patented, but had generated steady royalties. These are the legacy my husband left, I said, raising my gaze to meet the judge's, and they have sustained investments that I've managed prudently for years. Reed laid my bank statements before the court, the totals stark and undeniable. Then Marin stepped forward, her evidence stacked in a neat folder. She showed photographs of Poppy, jacket thin against the morning frost, walking alone down deserted streets. She detailed Jason's crushing overtime shifts, Sloane's ballooning debts, and finally the email chain, Sloane bargaining with a colleague over inflated costs at the nursing homes. The tension thickened. Jason stared down at the table, shame written across his face. Sloane snapped, "This is a distortion. She's confused, paranoid." But the judge cut her off, his tone clipped and final. "Mrs. Whitaker is lucid and fully competent. The guardianship petition is denied. Furthermore, based on this evidence, CPS will expand its investigation into the welfare of the child, Poppy Whitaker." The gavel struck. The echo rang through the room like thunder. For the first time in weeks, my lungs filled fully, relief mixing with vindication. But the victory was short-lived. Outside the courthouse, the sky had turned a bruised gray, wind whipping down the streets with sheets of icy rain. Sirens wailed as emergency vehicles raced past, the city already bracing for the storm's full assault. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, shielding the screen from the rain. Poppy's voice cracked through the line, trembling. "Grandma, I'm scared. Mommy left. Daddy's not home yet. The lights are flickering. I don't know what to do." The words punched through me harder than any courtroom battle. My triumph over Sloane and Jason suddenly felt hollow compared to the fear in my granddaughter's voice. "I'm coming, sweetheart," I whispered, gripping the phone tight. I shoved it back into my coat, pulled the hood over my head, and stepped into the chaos. Wind roared down the street, bending traffic lights, sending trash cans skittering like toys. My heart pounded, not from fear of the storm, but from the truth I could no longer ignore. The fight wasn't finished in the courtroom. The real test waited in the heart of the storm, with a little girl alone in the dark, depending on me to reach her. And I would. Nothing. Not a scheming daughter-in-law, not my own son's betrayal, not even a nor'easter tearing across the coast was going to stop me. The storm struck with a violence that rattled every wall of Rockport. Wind howled through the narrow gaps of my cottage. Rain lashed sideways against the glass, and the ocean roared as though it meant to swallow the cliffs whole. The power was out across town, leaving streets swallowed in darkness, broken only by the erratic flash of transformers blowing one by one. I strapped a flashlight to my wrist and stepped into the gale. Branches cracked underfoot, shingles tore from roofs, and the bitter salt spray stung my face. Each step toward Jason's house felt like a battle against the elements themselves, but the thought of Poppy, alone and afraid, burned hotter than the storm's chill. The front door creaked open under my hand, revealing a house steeped in blackness. The smell of damp carpet and extinguished candles clung to the air. From upstairs came a whimper. "Grandma." I hurried up the steps, my light cutting through the dark. There she was, Poppy, huddled under her blanket, flashlight clutched to her chest, tears streaking her cheeks. I scooped her into my arms, her small body trembling against mine. "It's all right, sweetheart. You're safe now," I whispered. Cradling her close, I braved the storm again, my coat plastered to my back as I carried her down the street. Across from the school, my newly bought house stood like a beacon. The backup generator hummed, spilling warm light into the storm-soaked night. Inside, I set her by the fire I'd prepared earlier, wrapped her in a quilt, and poured her a cup of cocoa from the thermos I'd brought. Her breathing steadied, her eyes still wide but calmer now. A sharp knock rattled the door. Marin slipped inside, her raincoat dripping onto the hardwood floor. She laid a thick folder on the table. "I've got it all," she said. Emails, spreadsheets, contracts, proof Sloane's been skimming from the nursing home chain, insurance fraud, inflated costs, everything. I leafed through the pages, the storm outside underscoring each revelation. It was worse than I imagined. Sloane hadn't just schemed to take me down, she'd turned elder care into her own personal cash machine. By dawn, the winds began to ease, leaving a battered, waterlogged town in its wake. The sky glowed pale, bruised purple as Reed arrived, his briefcase in hand. He wasted no time. "I've called Jason and Sloane. They'll meet us here." We gathered in my living room, the storm still dripping from their coats as they stepped inside. Jason's face was gray, his eyes hollow. Sloane clutched her purse like a lifeline, her lips pressed tight, though the defiance in her eyes still flickered. I laid the evidence before them, each page a weapon sharper than the last. "You wanted control of my life. Instead, I now hold the proof of yours." Reed's voice was even, his presence steady. "Here are the terms. Sloane withdraws the guardianship petition. She writes a formal apology. She accepts CPS oversight, and she attends mandatory financial counseling. If any of this is refused," he tapped the folder, "these documents go to the district attorney." For the first time, Sloane faltered. Her bravado cracked as she flipped through the damning pages. This is all exaggerated," she whispered, but her voice broke. "No," I said softly, with the force of finality. "This is who you are when you think no one is watching." Silence filled the room. Then Jason, shoulders shaking, whispered, "I can't do this anymore." He turned to me, tears glinting in his tired eyes. "Mom, I've let it go too far. I thought I was protecting my family, but I see now. I was destroying it." Sloane's pen scratched across the page. The agreement was signed. Her hands trembled as she pushed it back across the table. For once, there were no clever words, no cold smirk, just defeat. I closed the folder, sliding it toward Reed. "Then it's done." After they left, the house quiet again. I returned to the hearth. Poppy slept curled in the quilt, the firelight soft against her cheeks. I eased onto the chair beside her, letting my hand rest gently on her small shoulder. Outside, rain still tapped against the windows, but the worst had passed. The storm had taken shingles and branches, but it had also taken the last illusions Jason and Sloane clung to. I looked out at the dripping dawn, the waves calmer now, and breathed deep. I had taken back my power, not just for me, but for the little girl dreaming beside the fire. For the first time in years, I felt certain the future belonged to us. 6 months later, Rockport was alive with spring. The air carried a soft salt tang mixed with the sweetness of budding lilacs, and the narrow streets were lined with fresh green leaves shimmering in the ocean breeze. In front of my new house, I dug into the damp earth, guiding the young roots of a red maple into the soil. its tender leaves, the color of fire, quivered as if they already knew they would one day shade this porch long after I was gone. Beside the tree, the old wind chime Cal had made swayed in the morning gust. Its mellow notes rang out, a voice from the past reminding me that love can be carried forward if we choose to tend it. I touched the worn metal gently, smiling through the sting of memory. The house across the street, Jason's house, looked different now. The blinds were open more often, the lawn better kept, the tension less visible. Jason had begun attending parenting workshops and marriage counseling, one tentative step at a time. I could see it in the way he knelt to tie Poppy's shoelaces, in the patience with which he listened to her chatter. He wasn't transformed overnight, but there was movement, a flicker of the boy I had once raised, trying to resurface. Sloane, too, had changed course. Therapy had stripped away some of her sharp edges. She still carried pride like a shield, but I sometimes glimpsed vulnerability beneath it. She greeted me cautiously, with words chosen carefully, as if she knew one wrong step could shatter the fragile truce. Trust wasn't rebuilt yet. It would take years, but at least the demolition had stopped. One evening, under the soft light of my study lamp, I signed a new will. The terms were deliberate. Jason would inherit only when he proved himself as a father and a man worthy of Cal's legacy. Poppy's future was secured, her trust fund sealed away until she turned 25, safe from the reach of anyone else's mistakes. As my pen left the page, I felt a certainty I hadn't felt in decades. The future was no longer dangling over a cliff. On a breezy Saturday morning, I carried my teacup out to the porch and settled into the wicker chair. The steam of Earl Grey curled upward, mingling with the fresh air. Across the street, the schoolyard rang with children's laughter, a sound that had become the metronome of my days. A familiar voice pierced through it. "Grandma, look!" Poppy sped up the sidewalk on her bicycle, a purple helmet glinting in the sun. She braked in front of the porch, holding out a badge with pride. "I got the reading award at the library." Her grin was wide, her cheeks flushed, her eyes shining with triumph. I laughed softly, clapping my hands. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Come up and show me." She bounded up the steps, placing the badge in my palm as if it were a medal of honor. I pinned it to her jacket and kissed her hair, breathing in the clean scent of sunshine and soap. As she pedaled away again, I leaned back, letting the chime's music wash over me. The red maple's leaves trembled, a promise of shade for summers yet to come. Watching her ride off, hair flying, laughter trailing behind, I felt a surge of peace I hadn't known in years. I hadn't fought this battle to punish Jason or to humiliate Sloane. I hadn't returned to settle old debts. I had come back to steer, to take the wheel when they had let it go. Poppy's future and Cal's legacy were safe now, firmly in my hands. And as the sun lit her path and the chime whispered its song, I thought to myself, I did not come back for revenge. I came back to take the helm. The future of my granddaughter and the legacy of my husband are secure, at last.